see if I'm coming out live. Okie dokie. Hopefully I'm coming out live. I'm just going to make sure. Let me just check on my phone. Excellent, excellent. So I should be coming out live. So I'm going to give it a moment for people to join to recap the day 3 of the 7 days of dog sports challenges that I've been running all this week. So I'm going to give it a moment. Hopefully people will join me. Let's have a look. Let's turn the volume down. Okay, people are joining. So if someone, excuse me, hopefully you can all hear me. Just let me know in the comments. I always like to double check. I have been bitten in the past where I've been rambling on and there's been no audio. So I just like to make sure that everybody can hear me before I start chatting away about today's challenge, which was all about retrieves. So let me know that you can hear me. I'm just going to give it a second. Have a slurp of coffee whilst I'm doing that. Hopefully you can hear me. So yeah, excellent, brilliant. Thank you, Dawn. I appreciate that. So all this week, I've been running the 7 days of dog sport challenges. Each day, posting a different challenge for people to partake in. And I just want to shout out everybody that has posted the videos. Use the hashtag 7 days dog sports challenges and let me know, because obviously once that's all done, on Sunday I'm going to be picking a random person that will get a free place on one of my online courses, Obedience Fanatics or Heelwork Masterclass, and that will give you access to my VIP group, which has seen people, everything from first-time dog owners competing dog sports to Crufts champions to world team members to international obedience champions, people that compete abroad, massive amount of success within that group, and they all have access to me as their coach, which is a fundamental part of their training, and it's a privilege to be part of their journey. So if you want to be part of that group and get access to me as your coach, just simply post your video, use the hashtag 7 days of dog sports challenges, and you will be able to hopefully win a free place on that group. So other than that, let's dive in. So each day I'll be posting a different challenge. On Monday it was the Simon Says game, one of my really favourite core foundation skills to teach my dogs and my students, which gets them to evaluate how well does their dog understand a verbal cue. In this case it was sit, stand and down, the most simple basic cue that we are going to use consistently in our dog sports careers and journeys. Our dogs really have to understand that, and what it showed us is that our dogs are dependent sometimes on body language, and movement is a point of conflict for them. So we really want them to understand their verbal cue despite our body language or our movement. Think of your obedience dog, think of your agility dog, think of your IGP dog. All of those, or any of the sports, Heelwork to Music, Mondio, you really want your dog to understand that cue to do it despite you. So therefore, you're going to have confidence in the dog's ability to perform at the highest level. So that was day 1. Day 2 was all about hand touches. Hand touches can be used for so many obedience skills, so many dog sport skills. It can be used for heel work training, it can be used for retrieve training, it can be used for target training for scent work, it can be used for indications, I should say. It can be used for heel work position moves, whether you're doing a DWD or heel work to music. So many uses with hand touches. And I showed you 3 different versions. One was just the standard hand touch with duration. Second example was proofing the hand touch with using food and toys. Third example was moving. And it showed the videos that I've been seeing. It's been great to see you guys embracing those challenges and giving it a go. Most people had the initial challenge, which was level 1 was duration, level 2 was proofing. Most of you had that. Movement, some of you struggled with movement, so that's a brilliant opportunity to enhance and grow your dog's understanding. And today our challenge was all about retrieves. I showed various retrieves, small, medium, large, and the really extreme end of the spectrum was the extra large. Fantastic to see you guys attempting these challenges. I just love to see people training their dogs. Hopefully it's motivating you. That's a massive part of being successful in dog sports, is motivation and consistency, and we want that from not only the dog, but we've got to be motivated and consistent ourselves. So hopefully it's been motivating you. So the things that I used in the retrieve was initially my house keys, then I used a large shoehorn, and then I used a watering can, and then finally it was a pole from an agility jump. And obviously that's a level of progression. The dog that I was using to demonstrate it, she's really, really confident on that exercise, and she's had that various articles trained throughout her life. So if those articles, I would say, would be pretty not easy, but would definitely pose a challenge even for her. So you want to think about, when you train a retrieve, reducing it to its most basic entity. I would say the clicker trained retrieve is probably one of the most common areas that a lot of people struggle with to master the timing of how to progress it, and the pitfalls that can fall into. And I can say this from experience, because I made an absolute arse of it the first time I clicker trained a retrieve with one of my dogs, and that was probably about 20 plus years ago. And it was my first Malinois, Strut, who I tried to clicker train his retrieve, and in all truth, I did it really, really badly. And there's fundamental errors that I made with him that I see other people make, that hopefully now I've certainly, with my own dogs and with my students' dogs and my clients' dogs, I've worked through those challenges and been able to come up with a pretty comprehensive way of teaching it. So the first fundamental error that lots of people make in retrieve is not knowing when to move it on. So when you shape a retrieve, the first thing is to decide on what type of article that you use. Now, I'm quite fanatical about the article that I start a dog on retrieve off. I'm just going to make this bigger, bear with me. With my dogs, and I really spend time considering the article that I use depending on the dog. So I like to use an article that the dog doesn't perceive as a toy, and the reason being is that I want the dog to be more focused on the reinforcement, what I have available to them, than picking up the article themselves. And the reason being is that I don't want them to get conflicted that it's a toy and then offer chewing or mouthing, etc., or tugging on it. Okay, I want to be really clear when I'm training a formal clicker trained retrieve. Okay, so think about the article that you're going to use. Things that I like to use aren't necessarily what I would say was easy for the dog to pick up. The dog can pick it up, but they have to apply some thought. So examples would be, I would use something like, I'll just pull it out of the socket here. So that's just turn off the light. So this would be a good thing to use for, depending on the breed of dog I have. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing that with Beryl. But I would be using let me just turn that back on. Let's kill the light. Bear with me all. Standby caller. There we go. So I would be using something that the dog can pick up. It can physically hold it in its mouth, but it isn't something that the dog is going to necessarily offer chewing on. Another good example of an article I like to use is a teaspoon. Great article to start off with my stronger breeds of dogs. For example, my Malinois, my German Shepherd, my Giant Schnauzer, my Boxer, all started on really physically hard articles, so that the dog didn't, because they're so predisposed to grabbing, they didn't perceive it as a toy and then grab it and rehearse inappropriate behaviour. With my softer breeds, like for example with Beryl, I used with her a little plastic, it was a toy, actually one of these old toys, and it was sort of about that sort of long, sort of under 3 or 4 inches, quite light in weight, and it was just, I can't even remember what it was for, to be truthful, but it was a little plastic item. Another good thing is those seals that you can use for plastic bags, the clips, they're a really good article for smaller dogs. They're plastic, they're hard plastic, they're not necessarily inviting for the dog to pick up in terms of being perceived as a toy, but the dog can physically pick it up. So it's worth spending the time considering what article you're going to use before you start teaching the dog. If you've noted, I have distinctly said I don't start teaching retrieves on a dumbbell. And the reason I don't start it on a dumbbell is because in the learning phase, your dog is going to make a lot of errors. It's going to pick it up, it's going to chew it, it's going to mouth it, it's going to drop it. I don't want the dog to rehearse that on something that is going to be of such a significant importance to the dog. So obviously in certain sports, for example, in obedience, in working trials, in IGP, you need a dumbbell throughout at some point in your test. In IGP, you need several dumbbells. In obedience, you need it at the preliminary levels. In working trials, you need it again at the preliminary levels. But the dumbbell has such a significant a value to the dog. I don't want to allow the dog to rehearse inappropriate choices or errors on that article before I transition on to the dumbbell further down the line. So think about the article that you use. Try to avoid using the dumbbell initially. That's my preference. And I like to teach the retrieve and the really solid grip before I move on to adding the dumbbell in. If they can hold an article, for example, like my plug there, really, really firmly, I know that they can pick up a dumbbell really, really easily. Think about, obviously, you want to think about safety issues. Don't use anything that can break in the dog's mouth. Don't use anything which should go without saying. That's going to cause the dog any physical discomfort or pain. Just think about the article that you use with the dog. With Jungle, I actually used it was a little cube, and it was made of foam because I wanted her to have a very deliberately soft, gentle hold because of the breed that she was. I knew that she'd be intense, and I did that for an express purpose. So think about the article that you use with your dog. That's the first thing. When you get to teaching the retrieve, another classic error that people make is they stick at clicking the same behavior too many times. Okay, so for example, the first session that I do, the behavior I'm looking for is any interaction with the article. So the dog goes up and it sniffs the article. I click the dog and reward the dog. Another little nuance is I tend to reward by the article to draw the dog's focus and attention back to the article. I then wait for another alternative behavior. The dog might sniff it again. Hopefully the dog will nibble it or nuzzle it, and I click that. Now I gradually raise criteria until I hopefully can get my dog picking it up. And in most of the first session, I will normally aim for that, the dog grabbing the article at least for maybe half a second or a second, depending on the dog. Now, session 1, tick box done. Okay. When I move to session 2, this is a classic error that people make. They go back and they click the dog for the initial behavior of sniffing. Okay, and they repeat that sequence: sniffing, nuzzling, grabbing, holding for duration. Boom. So that's day 1, day 2. We've moved our retrieve on. Same thing, day 3. The dog then sniffs, repeats that sequence, and holds it a bit longer. Brilliant. Day 4, same thing. And this is when people tend to struggle when they try to build duration. Okay, and the reason being, if we think of it logically, and normally I would use a chart to explain this, the behavior that has been most strongly reinforced is the sniffing or nuzzling behavior. So the dog in its head believes that's what you want it to do. And in order to move it on, a definite expert tip would be to not reinforce those initial interactions once you've got that past that stage. So by the second or third session, I'm no longer accepting nuzzling or sniffing the article as a reinforceable behavior. The dog has to at least make physical contact with the article and hopefully hold it. Okay, so that's a massive area that a lot of people fall foul to, where the dog gets stuck into the pick up and drop, pick up and drop, pick up and drop. Now, second stumbling block, or third, or whichever, I've lost track of the areas. So first is picking the article. That's the first thing. Second thing is moving the criteria on relatively quickly. Third thing is a classic area is how to build duration. So 3 things that people often fall foul of. So the third entity is building duration, and that's where a lot of people struggle. And they struggle because initially they try to shape the dog holding the article still as well as holding it for a period of time. And we need to distinguish between the two things at first. So when I first shape a retrieve, I'm not marking the dog, or I'm not so concerned, I should say, with the dog holding it and mouthing it, as long as the dog doesn't drop it. Okay? So the dog picks up the article, it holds it, it mouths it a little bit, holds it for 3 or 4 seconds, click, and reward the dog. Okay? Now I raise the criteria again. Dog holds it a little bit longer, I click and reward the dog. Now I'm going to be looking, the dog might hold it for 5 seconds, but there might be intermittent chewing. Ideally, what I'm going to do is select the moment within that time frame when the dog is more solid, and I'll click at that point. Okay? And then I'm aiming to then shift my criteria or raise my criteria to holding it firmer or stiller. Now that's a nuance that so many people struggle with, and there is a simple fix for that issue that so many people could be using, and I actually intimated it yesterday. So I'm going to give it a moment, see if there's any questions, and see if anybody can figure out what the easiest way to get duration on a retrieve is, and it follows on from what we did yesterday. Okay, so let's have a look. Any questions? Yeah, Kerry said, retrieve being difficult. I watched the video, how to make the first step, please. So hopefully that's covered for you. I've answered that, Kerry. First, just click any interaction, but make sure that you raise the criteria relatively quickly. Joe, I'm not going to even attempt to say your surname because I think I'll butcher it. Pet dog retrieve, teaching dogs to hold, struggling, asking dog to hold. So again, shape it, choose the article. We used to do this in my pet classes. Get random articles and shape the pet dogs to pick up articles randomly. And we did it obviously in the way that I've described, initially shaping any interaction and then raising the criteria to grouping the article and then shaping the dog to holding it longer. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Janka, in gun dog training, we always start with dummies, which is what we use in competitions. Do you think we should use something else to start with so errors are not made on dummies? Personally, that's what I would do. I wouldn't train my retrieve on something that had value on it, simply because there is a possibility that the dog is going to rehearse error, is going to fail. Depending on the method that you use, the dog might find it a little bit concerning or worrying, and I don't want that emotion to be attached to the retrieve article. So use something lying around the house, teach it the retrieve in its entirety, and then put it on the formal article that you're going to use. Okay? So Joe, hopefully I answered that question. My dog picks it up and throws it at me. Haley said, my dog picks it up, comes and throws it at me. Shall I ask for a chin rest? Oh, there's a thought. So you've stumbled along something there, Haley, so I'm going to come back to that. But yeah, that's a really good idea, okay? Chomping, how to speed up return. So Sophie asked chomping and how to speed up return. So obviously don't work on those two things simultaneously, Sophie. So if I'm working on chomping, I'm going to use an article that hopefully will deter the dog from chomping. So something that's physically hard. And then I can work on speed. So for example, a metal spoon, and I can work on just speed of return. And then I can work on the dog holding the article firmly. And the chomping is one of those things, especially with certain breeds and certain types of dogs, that the dog can find self-reinforcing. And the way in which I would get around that is I would initially use an article that deterred the dog from chomping, so I can reinforce stillness lots and lots and lots. And then I would gradually transition to something that was a little bit more enticing. And one of the articles that I like to use is something that has a little bit of give in it, so I can very clearly hear the dog chomp the article, in which case I can just interrupt the behaviour and ask the dog to repeat it and aim to have stillness. Now, with a dog that has intensity for toys or motion, a really good way is to do what I call the freeze, where I have the dog fixate on an article or reinforcer, and what they tend to do is, because they go still, what you call lock up, if anybody bite work or dogs that have been taught to speak, can often get really, really fixated, or what you call too aroused to respond, where they go really still. That can actually help you when it comes to retrieve training, because you create stillness. Now, there is another entity that I would add to the mix that definitely, as somebody picked up, a chin rest would be one thing I'd add, but there's another entity. So I'm going to see if anybody else can pick up on what it was. I mentioned it yesterday. Yeah, definitely hold with hand touch would be good. Sit with the whole duration. So just on duration, anybody got some thoughts about how I would create duration? I mentioned it yesterday. So my dog Eva said, oh, hang on, Chrissy, could you get the dog to hold item and ask for a hand touch? Absolutely, that would be a way to do it. But obviously you need hand touch with duration. I mentioned how I create duration with the dog, so I'm going to come back to that one in a second. Bethan asked, do you work on the present separately from the distance? So pup will go out and bring back, no problem, brings the dumbbell back, but as yet has no present with it. So I absolutely do. How I train a retrieve in shorthand version is I teach the retrieve, the present really thoroughly, independently of the retrieve. I teach my dog a really good hold on an article, and I teach it to move with the article, and then I sandwich the things together. And when I'm getting to the point of where I want to teach a retrieve, once I've got my hold and I've got a really solid present, it's a really easy exercise to put together. And from that point, once I've got a solid retrieve, I can move on and teach scent really, really, really quickly. So it's all about those layers and making sure the foundation is really, really solid. So I'm not sure anybody picked it up, but the thing that I would do differently now in retrieve training, which I didn't do in the past, those 20 plus years ago with Strut, was I would use my traffic light hands to indicate to my dog that what they were doing is correct, and I can open the palm and signal that to the dog. So my keep going signal. So that has been an absolute game changer for my dog's clarity and understanding of duration behaviors. So once I've got the dog holding the article for a very short period of duration, so 2 seconds for example, I can grow that very, very quickly by using my traffic light hands if the dog understands that concept really, really well. So I talked about it yesterday. I use, excuse me, my traffic light hands, as my good friend Di Martin talks about, and we talk about marker training. We talk about the use of an open palm to signal to our dogs to keep doing what they're doing, whether it's moving or whether the dog is stationary. Remain doing that behavior until I cue you to do something else. If the dog makes an error, I simply close my palm, which indicates to the dog that there's no longer reinforcement available. I allow the dog to make a choice. As soon as it makes the correct choice, I signal to the dog, and then I can click in that gap or the period of time where the dog is doing the correct response. Obviously, it's a little bit chicken and the egg. I need to have trained It's Your Choice or traffic light hands independently of retrieve training. The dog needs to have understood that in several different ways. For example, on my hand touch, on my sit, stand and down behaviors, which we've covered earlier in the week. So moving on to my retrieve, once I've got that understanding, I can use that It's Your Choice, traffic light hands, reverse lowering, all the same terms, or all the different terms for the same skill, to indicate to the dog that I want them to remain doing that behavior. So hopefully that makes sense to people. Anybody else got questions on retrieve, by the way? So with retrieve, whilst people are mulling over and hopefully typing any questions that they may have, I spent a lot of time tutoring that grip really, really firmly. I made that mistake, as I said, with Strut, when he was the dog that I first tried to clicker train, and to be truthful, I'm going to own my errors. I made a load of mistakes with him because of the things that I've discussed. Not moving the criteria on properly, starting my retrieve training on a dumbbell, not raising my criteria quick enough, not having a traffic light hands or duration signal to talk to the dog independently, trying to add motion too quickly. That was another big error that I made, trying to move it on and get it on the floor, or get him to pick it up and move with it, not breaking it down into small enough pieces. So once the dog had that understanding, once my dogs have the understanding of duration signals, It's Your Choice, etc., a retrieve is a relatively easy behaviour. In fact, it's probably one of the behaviours I love teaching now dogs to do retrieve and pick up articles, because it's such fun seeing their brain works, and it's probably one of the most powerful examples of clicker training really, really working well. So the dog understanding, I have the reinforcement, you offer the behaviour, you get reinforcement. It's that notion again of do something to get something. So traffic light hands, Chrissy, is a concept or a name used to describe a duration signal. It's an open palm that indicates to the dog, you are correct, keep doing that behaviour. Obviously that needs to be taught independently of before you move on to retrieve, but it's a skill that you can use in so many ways in your sports training for sure. So I would advise everybody to consider using a keep going signal in some way, shape or form. Okay, let's have a look. Do you use a cue such as get it? So Kerry asked, do you use a cue such as get it, then bring, then give? No, I don't use a verbal cue initially when I'm shaping it. I allow the offer the behaviour. And it's a good point you raised, Kerry, about when you put a cue on. I don't put a cue on a behaviour until I'm absolutely enamoured with the behaviour, so I've essentially trained it in its entirety. The cue will be the setup. So if I hold my dog's collar and the article goes out, the dog knows, oh yes, we're playing that retrieve game, and they're more than likely to offer the other pieces of the chain. So I don't have to teach the dog, I don't have to put a cue on it initially, because the setup it gives a lot of cues to the dog. And when I want to put it on a verbal cue, I can say the verbal cue, fetch, just before I start the action, and that should hopefully the dog should start to anticipate that happening, and then I can put it on a verbal cue. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Georgios, says, in the time of present, whilst the dog lifts its head on the last step, there's a bit of mouthing. How do you fix that? So if it's the dog as it does that, I would use an article, and I'd attach a piece of string to it. So what I would do is use a dumbbell. That's why I would. This is obviously a dog that's competing. Use the dumbbell and just get a lead and slip it around the end. So as the dog lifts its head, you can put a little bit of pressure on it, so the dog has to re-grip it and click that response. as the dog tightens its grip. I like to do a lot of proofing with my dogs, moving with the article in their mouth, lifting their head up, doing a twist, twirl, and I'll look for them to hold it firmly. I do all that sort of steps before I bring it into that position, and also teach the dog to lift its head onto a hand target. That's another good skill to teach the dog to really, really consolidate its understanding of a retrieve. Okay. Let's have a look. Oh gosh, where are we up to? Okay. When will you cover how to train traffic light hands? So traffic light hands is quite an involved process. That's covered extensively on my Obedience Fanatics course. It is, and also on my website there is the shaping and you can subscribe to a, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. Oh yeah, sorry, my head went blank there. Location specific and reward specific markers and shaping online course, which I did with my good friend Di Martin. That is covered extensively on that course if you're interested in finding more about traffic light hands. Okay. Eva asks, what can I do if taking the item off to chew is more rewarding than doing a retrieve? So I would look at the item that you're using, Eva. Use something that doesn't encourage that behaviour. So again, a metal spoon is a good item, or something made of metal. The dog is less likely to rehearse that. Obviously, you need to think safety when you're using metal articles. I'm happy. I've used metal spoons or like teaspoons or kitchen spoon, tablespoons, I should say. And I'm they're not extensively heavy, so you need to think about that with the dog. Or you can get a little piece of metal tubing that you can use, or hard plastic that discourages the dog from wanting to chew, so then you can reinforce the behaviour that you want. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Ruth asks, my dog brings the dumbbell in and sits back rather than a close present. I train the correct position I want when I'm sitting, and then will stand and mark when he's in the right position, but he won't come in as close. Oh, good one, Ruth. So that the detail there that you need to decide on is whether your dog does a rock back sit or a tuck sit. Okay, and that's a physical action the dog has to know how to maneuver into. So if this is my dog's top line in the sit, sorry, in the stand, okay, a tuck sit is where the dog will bring its rear end into its front. Okay, a rock back sit is where the dog will shift its front end into its rear to create the sit. And what I suspect is your dog is doing a present and then does a rock back sit, which is pulling it off your body. Now, a lot of breeds, they struggle to do a tuck sit where they keep their front still and they drag their bum into the sit, and you need to teach that separately. How I teach that is part of the challenge for tomorrow. So I'm going to hold off and you'll hopefully work out with the challenges tomorrow, but part of the challenge tomorrow is one of the exercises that would help overcome that. But you need to teach the dog the physical action of being able to bring its rear end into its front end, and you need to do that separately before you do presents, because that's the bit that the dog needs to understand to do a present, and also a halt on heel work. Okay. Heidi Dixon, what would you suggest as an item to teach a hold? My dog loves to destroy anything soft. So my preferences are something hard, plastic, or wood, you could use something like a piece of dowel or a plastic tubing. My preference again is not to use something that's cylindrical, because that looks like is similar to the bar of the dumbbell. For me, I like to use things like a hairbrush is a good retrieve article I've taught dogs on. As I said, this plug from my charger, I've used that with other dogs. Anything that's hard plastic, a bit of plastic tubing I've used there, which is one of the legs of one of my wobble boards. Anything like that is good. Just have a play around and think about the article, and have a look. Make sure, a big thing I cannot emphasize is make sure it's safe for the dog. All right, Georgia, elastic string. I probably wouldn't use elastic because there's the risk of it pinging. And I would use just a lead, a handle of the lead slipped on the end of the dumbbell so you can create resistance. I choose that over something that could elasticate, because I don't want to create pulling backwards and forth action and the dog thinking it's a tug game. Sophie said, I sort of have a verbal keep going marker, or keep going cue, which I think my dogs understand. Is that as good as a hand marker? Yeah, you can absolutely use a verbal marker to explain to the dog that you like that piece of the behaviour. For me, anything like that needs to be trained thoroughly, so we don't use it indiscriminately around our dog. So hence why the open palm, closed palm is so specific and so clear to the dog, versus a good dog, well done, which we may use in other circumstances and potentially water it down. So just make sure that you're clear with that information. All right, all. So I have got classes tonight, my competitive sports class. So I'm going to wrap things up and draw it to a close. I'm so glad to see people embracing the challenges, having fun with training their dogs and getting stuck in and just enjoying it. It's great to see your videos. You can see you're enjoying interacting with your dog. You're definitely having fun. Your dogs look like they're having fun. Some of you are posting some fantastic videos, so thank you very much for that. Again, all the challenges will continue until Sunday, in which I will draw out a winner for the place on my online courses, either Obedience Fanatics or Heel Up Masterclass, and you will then get access to my VIP group, where, as I said, there's people there that have competed at One Crufts. You've got people that have gone to the FMBB World Championships in IGP. You've got people that competed that have gone to major championships in various dog sports. There's people there from Agility, Obedience, Working Trials, Mondio, Heel Up to Music, Rally, Scentwork, you name it, it's covered in that course. So feel free to, if you're interested in getting coaching and you want somebody that can really help you and your dog grow their ability, improve your competing and your consistency, and also I do a lot of work on people's confidence and mental game. Join one of those groups and you can access that content. So for me, whatever you're doing, have a really good evening. The challenge will go out tomorrow, and I will let you guys know when I'm doing a live to discuss tomorrow's challenge. Tomorrow's a good one. Tomorrow's exercises are really fun. I love playing around with these things. So hopefully you will as well. Be interested to see what you guys come up with tomorrow's challenge. I look forward to seeing your videos. #7 Day Dog Sports Challenge. Have fun. Enjoy your dogs. Have a good evening, everybody.